In the medieval world, your job could define your entire life. Not just your income, but your status, your safety, and sometimes even your soul. Some people farmed, some fought, some prayed, but others had jobs so strange, so uncomfortable, and so unbelievable that today they sound almost fictional. Jobs that involved royal secrets, the dead, human waste, and duties performed in the quiet hours before dawn. Today we step away from the shining armor and noble courts and into the forgotten working lives of the medieval world. Because history remembers kings, but it often forgets the people who did the strangest work of all. So settle in, lower the lights, and let us begin. Chapter 1. The Groom of the Stool. The king's most uncomfortable companion. Among all medieval jobs, few sound more shocking to modern ears than this one. The Groom of the Stool. At first glance, the title sounds almost harmless, but the reality was far more intimate. In the royal courts of Tudor England, the Groom of the Stool was responsible for assisting the king during his most private moments, particularly his visits to the toilet. Yes, this was an official court position, and surprisingly, it was not considered low status. In fact, it was often a position of great trust. The royal reality. Medieval and early Tudor monarchs lived in a world where privacy was rare. Kings were almost never alone. Their daily routines were highly structured, ceremonial, and supervised. Even bodily functions became part of court protocol. The Groom of the Stool managed the king's close stool, portable toilet, water and towels, personal linens, and sometimes confidential conversations. Because the groom spent time alone with the king, in moments when few others were present, the role often became politically powerful. Access was influence, a position of trust. Under Henry VIII, the Groom of the Stool became one of the most trusted men in court. Several holders of the position rose to significant political influence. Why? Because proximity to power mattered more than dignity. In the quiet, private moments of daily routine, kings often spoke freely. Secrets were shared. Opinions were formed. Decisions were influenced. The Groom of the Stool was not merely a servant. He was a gatekeeper of intimacy. The daily routine. A typical day might include preparing the royal chamber, maintaining the close stool, ensuring fresh cloths and water, managing the king's private schedule, and overseeing certain aspects of personal finances. Over time, the role evolved into something closer to a senior court office, but its origins remained uncomfortably close to the king's most human needs. Why it matters? This job reveals something important about medieval society. Status was not always about the type of work performed. It was about proximity to power. The closer you were to the king, the more influence you could quietly hold, even in the most unexpected places. Slow pause. And strangely, this was only the beginning. Because elsewhere in the medieval world, another group of workers dealt not with kings, but with the sins of the dead. Chapter 2. The Sin Eater. Taking the dead's burden. In certain parts of Britain and Wales, a deeply unusual profession existed on the fringes of society. The Sin Eater. This was not an official church role, not a noble position, not even widely respected, but for grieving families. It served a powerful purpose. The ritual. When someone died, families sometimes feared the soul might carry unconfessed sins into the afterlife. To ease this burden, they would call for a sin eater. The ritual was simple and deeply symbolic. The sin eater would sit near the body, place bread on the chest of the deceased, eat the bread, and sometimes drink ale. By consuming the food, the sin eater was believed to symbolically absorb the sins of the dead, taking them upon himself, so the departed soul could rest easier. Life on the margins. Despite performing a service that comforted grieving families, sin eaters were often socially isolated. People feared them, avoided them, whispered about them. After all, if you believed someone carried the sins of the dead, would you want them as your neighbor? Most sin eaters lived in poverty on the edges of communities, called upon when needed, forgotten when not. Historical debate. Historians still debate how widespread the practice truly was. Documented cases appear mainly in Wales and the English border regions. One often cited example is Richard Munslow, who reportedly worked as a sin eater in the 17th century. Whether common or rare, the role reveals something deeply human: the fear of unfinished business after death, and the strange ways societies try to find comfort. Soft pause. But while sin-eaters worked with the dead, another medieval profession dealt with something equally unpleasant and far more physical. Chapter 3. The Night Soil Collector. The job no one wanted. In medieval cities, there was no modern plumbing, no underground sewage systems, no flush toilets, which meant someone had to deal with the waste. Enter the night soil collector. What was night soil? Night soil was the polite term for human waste collected from chamber pots, cesspits, privies, and household containers, because removing it during the day would have been socially unpleasant. The work was done at night, quietly, carefully, and often in terrible conditions. The work itself. Night soil collectors moved through sleeping cities with carts and buckets. They emptied cesspits, cleared waste pits, transported the material outside city walls. In some cases, the waste was even reused as fertilizer. It was essential work. Without it, medieval cities would have quickly become unlivable. Yet the workers themselves were often poorly paid, socially avoided, and exposed to serious health risks. The smell of the medieval city. Modern visitors often imagine medieval towns as picturesque. Stone streets, timbered houses, bustling markets. But the reality was far more sensory, especially the smell. Night soil collectors were part of the hidden system that kept cities functioning. Invisible workers maintaining fragile urban life. Slow pause. And yet, even this was not the strangest medieval profession, because some workers were hired to wake people up before alarm clocks existed. Chapter 4. The knocker-up. The human alarm clock. Long before smartphones, long before mechanical alarm clocks became common, people still had to wake up on time. Factory workers, laborers, servants, early risers of every kind. And in parts of Britain, especially later in the pre-industrial period, there existed a very unusual solution. The knocker-up. How the job worked. A knocker-up was hired to wake clients at a specific time. Their tools were simple but effective. Long sticks, batons, or even pea shooters. They would tap on bedroom windows until the sleeper woke. Payment was often weekly. Reliability was essential. Oversleeping was not an option. A job of precision. Knocker-ups worked in the quiet pre-dawn hours, moving through dark streets, memorizing routes, keeping strict time. Some became well known in their communities for their accuracy. It was a strange job, but an important one. Because in a world before reliable personal alarms, human punctuality sometimes depended on another human entirely. The quiet discipline of medieval work. What these strange professions reveal is something deeply fascinating. The medieval world was not just about knights and castles. It was a complex network of specialized labor. Some prestigious, some uncomfortable, some nearly forgotten, but all essential in their own way. And this was only the beginning. Because in the medieval world, there were still stranger jobs waiting in the shadows. Jobs involving animals, execution, medicine, and royal entertainment. So if you'd like to continue this slow journey into the working lives history almost forgot, stay with me and rest your eyes as we prepare to go deeper. The medieval world was not just kings and knights. It was a world powered by people doing jobs so strange, so uncomfortable, that today they almost sound fictional. In part 1, we uncovered some of the most bizarre roles ever recorded. But the deeper we dig into medieval life, the stranger it gets. Tonight, we continue our journey into the forgotten professions that kept castles running, cities clean, and monarchs comfortable. And trust me, by the end of this episode, you'll be very grateful for your modern job. Let's step back into the shadows of history. Chapter 7. The Toad Doctor, Poison Specialist. Imagine being paid to handle poisonous toads all day. In medieval Europe, one of the strangest medical specialists was the toad doctor, a healer who believed that certain toads could cure disease, detect poison, and even protect against witchcraft. What did a toad doctor do? Their duties included crushing dried toads into powder, creating toadstones for protection, treating poison victims, preparing bizarre medical remedies, selling anti-witchcraft charms. Many medieval people believed that toads had mystical properties, especially related to poison. Some even believed a special stone inside a toad's head could detect deadly toxins. Why people trusted them? The medieval world had limited medical knowledge. Fear ruled daily life. Fear of poisoning. Fear of witchcraft. Fear of unexplained illness. The toad doctor offered something priceless. Hope. And in a fearful world, hope was powerful currency. The dark reality. Handling toxic animals daily was dangerous. Some toad doctors likely suffered. Skin infections, poison exposure, respiratory problems. Yet the profession survived for centuries. Because when science is weak, superstition grows strong. Chapter 8. The Professional Mourner. In the medieval world, grief itself became a profession. Yes, some people were literally paid to cry at funerals. These were known as professional mourners, and they were in surprisingly high demand. Why hire someone to cry? Because in medieval society, the louder the mourning, the more important the dead person appeared. Families hired mourners to wail loudly, beat their chests, tear their clothes, create dramatic funeral scenes. The goal? To show the community that the deceased was deeply loved and socially important. A performance of grief. Professional mourners were essentially emotional actors. Some were so skilled that they became famous locally. They knew exactly when to sob, when to scream, when to collapse dramatically. Funerals could become theatrical events. In some regions, mourners were even given scripts. The economics of sadness. Payment depended on volume of crying, duration of the funeral, social status of the deceased. The wealthier the family, the louder the funeral. Controversy around the practice. Not everyone approved. Some church officials criticized the practice, calling it fake grief, dishonest mourning, excessive emotional display. But the tradition persisted. Because in the medieval world, reputation mattered, even in death. Chapter 9. The Rat Catcher. Before modern sanitation, cities had a serious enemy. Rats. And medieval towns were absolutely crawling with them. Enter one of the bravest and most uncomfortable jobs of the era. The rat catcher. A dangerous daily hunt. Rat catchers were responsible for hunting rats in homes, clearing infestations in markets, protecting grain supplies, controlling disease spread. This was not a clean job. It was filthy, risky, and often life-threatening. The plague connection. During outbreaks like the Black Death, rat catchers became even more critical. Though medieval people didn't fully understand germs, they knew one thing. Where rats gathered, death often followed. Rat catchers worked in the most dangerous environments imaginable. Many likely died young. Their unusual tools. Common rat-catching methods included traps, small hunting dogs, ferrets, poison mixtures, hand capture. Yes, really. Some catchers became local legends for their bravery. Others were viewed with suspicion because they worked so closely with disease. Social status. Despite their importance, rat catchers were rarely respected. They lived on the edge of society. Necessary, but not admired. Chapter 10. The Sin Eater. Now we enter one of the most haunting professions of the medieval world. A job so strange, so symbolic, that it almost feels mythical. The Sin Eater. What was a Sin Eater? In parts of medieval Britain and Wales, families sometimes hired a person to eat the sins of the dead. Yes, literally. The ritual worked like this. Bread was placed on the corpse. The Sin Eater consumed the bread. The deceased was believed to be spiritually cleansed. It was a chilling ceremony. Why people believed in it? Medieval society feared dying with unconfessed sins. People believed the Sin Eater absorbed the soul's burden, freed the dead for the afterlife, prevented restless spirits. It was part religion, part superstition, part desperate hope. The life of a Sin Eater. Sin Eaters were deeply stigmatized. Communities often feared them, avoided them, treated them as spiritually contaminated. They performed a sacred service, but lived like outcasts. A lonely profession. Many Sin Eaters lived in poverty. They were only welcomed when someone died, and then quickly pushed away again. It was one of the most emotionally heavy jobs in medieval society. Chapter 11. The Night Soil Collector. If you think your job is unpleasant, wait until you hear this. Before modern sewage systems, someone had to remove human waste from cities. That someone was the night soil collector. Why night soil? Because the work happened after dark. Collectors moved through streets at night, emptying chamber pots, privies, cesspits. They transported the waste outside city walls. Yes, by hand. The daily reality. This job involved overpowering smells, dangerous gases, risk of disease, physically exhausting labor. Yet it was absolutely essential. Without night soil collectors, medieval cities would have drowned in their own filth. Surprisingly well paid. Because few people wanted the job, Night soil collectors often earned decent wages. In some cities, they were among the better-paid laborers. Sometimes the worst jobs paid the best. An invisible workforce. Like many unpleasant professions, they worked in the shadows. Most citizens preferred not to think about them. But every morning, because of their work, cities were just a little bit cleaner. Chapter 12, The Leech Collector. Medicine in the medieval world was unusual. One of the most in-demand medical supplies was leeches, and someone had to collect them. Why leeches? Medieval doctors practiced bloodletting. They believed removing blood could cure many illnesses. Leeches were perfect for this purpose. Demand was enormous. The collector's method. Leech collectors often waded barefoot into marshes, let leeches attach to their legs, pulled them off manually, stored them for sale. Yes, they used their own bodies as bait. Health risks. This job carried serious dangers. Blood loss, infection, swamp diseases, skin damage. Yet the medical market kept demand high for centuries. A job that slowly disappeared. As medical science improved, bloodletting fell out of favor. And with it, the leech collector faded into history. The medieval world was built on jobs most of us could never imagine doing. People ate sins, collected human waste, hunted plague-carrying rats, harvested leeches from their own skin. And yet, without them, medieval society simply could not function. But we're not finished yet. Because in Part 3, we'll uncover some of the most disturbing and shocking medieval jobs ever recorded, including roles inside royal courts that were far stranger than anything we've covered so far. So if you think medieval jobs couldn't get any weirder, trust me, they absolutely do. By now, you've seen just how strange medieval jobs could be. People who ate sins. People who hunted rats during deadly plagues. People who cleaned entire cities in the dead of night. But tonight, we go deeper into the shadows. Because some medieval professions weren't just strange. They were disturbing, dangerous, and sometimes deeply unsettling. And the most shocking part? Many of these workers were employed by kings themselves. Let's continue our journey into the most bizarre careers in medieval history. Chapter 13, The Groom of the Stool. Now we arrive at one of the most famously strange royal jobs ever recorded. The Groom of the Stool. Yes, this was the royal bathroom attendant. What did the Groom of the Stool do? In medieval England, the Groom of the Stool was responsible for assisting the king during his most private moments. Duties included preparing the royal toilet, providing water and towels, assisting the king if needed, managing the king's close stool, portable toilet, monitoring the king's digestive health. It sounds shocking today, but this was actually a position of immense trust. Why the role was powerful? Because the groom had private access to the monarch. In courts where access meant influence, this job became extremely prestigious. Some grooms rose to become major political figures, especially during the reign of Henry VIII. They handled something very personal, but gained something very powerful. The king's confidence. The strange paradox. The job was both deeply intimate, politically important. In the medieval court, even the most uncomfortable duties could lead to great power. Chapter 14, The Executioner. Few medieval jobs carried as much fear and isolation as this one. The executioner. A necessary but hated profession. Executioners were responsible for carrying out legal punishments, including beheadings, hangings, torture sentences, public executions. Despite performing official duties, executioners were often socially shunned. People feared them, avoided them, whispered about them. Why society feared them? Medieval people believed executioners were spiritually tainted by death. Many faced social isolation, forced residence outside city walls, difficulty marrying, limited social interaction. Yet cities could not function without them. Skill mattered. A skilled executioner was actually respected, quietly, because a clean execution meant less suffering, less public outrage, faster justice. A poorly performed execution could cause riots. The psychological burden. Imagine performing executions regularly. Many historians believe the emotional toll was enormous. The executioner lived between two worlds, feared by society, yet required by it. Chapter 15, The Bear Leader. In medieval Europe, entertainment could be brutal. One unusual profession was the bear leader. What was a bear leader? Bear leaders trained and controlled bears used for street performances, traveling shows, aristocratic entertainment, bear baiting events. It was dangerous work. Very dangerous. Daily risks. Even trained bears were unpredictable. Handlers faced severe injuries, sudden attacks, public accidents, escaped animals. Yet bear shows were wildly popular. Crowds gathered eagerly. Why the job existed? Medieval entertainment was limited. No cinemas. No television. Live spectacles were everything. And few spectacles were more thrilling or terrifying than a performing bear. A cruel reality. Today, many view this profession as deeply cruel. But in the medieval mindset, it was simply entertainment. A reminder that the past often had very different moral boundaries. Chapter 16, The Plague Searcher. When disease struck medieval cities, panic followed. During outbreaks like the Black Death, special workers were hired to perform one grim task: to identify the dead. These were the plague searchers. Their grim responsibility. Plague searchers were tasked with inspecting bodies, determining cause of death, reporting plague cases, marking infected houses, tracking the spread of disease. They worked where few others dared to go. Extreme danger. Searchers entered homes filled with infection. At a time with no germ theory, no protective equipment, no antibiotics. Many searchers likely died from exposure. Why cities needed them? Authorities needed data, even in the medieval world. They had to know how fast the plague was spreading, which neighborhoods were infected, when to impose quarantines. Plague searchers were early public health workers, working in terrifying conditions. The emotional toll. Imagine walking house to house, seeing entire families gone, night after night. This was one of the most psychologically devastating medieval jobs. Chapter 17, The Royal Taster. Powerful rulers lived with constant fear. Poison, assassination, betrayal. So they employed someone whose job was both simple and deadly. The royal food taster. The ultimate test. Before the monarch ate, the taster would sample the food, drink the wine, wait for symptoms, approve the meal. If the taster survived, the king could eat. A job of pure risk. Most days were uneventful, but the risk was always present, especially during politically unstable reigns. Royal courts were full of rivals, and poison was a favored weapon. Trust above all. Like the groom of the stool, this role required enormous trust. Tasters were carefully chosen. Often, loyal servants, trusted nobles, longtime court members, because one mistake could mean the king's death. Quiet heroes of the court. History rarely remembers them, but many monarchs likely survived assassination attempts because of their tasters. Silent guardians at the royal table. The medieval world was not just built by kings and knights. It was held together by people doing jobs most of us could never imagine. People who assisted kings in their most private moments, faced wild animals for entertainment, walked into plague-filled homes, risked their lives with every royal meal. And we are still not at the strangest jobs yet. Because in Part 4, we enter the truly disturbing side of medieval labor, professions so dark and unusual that many historians still debate them today. So if you thought things couldn't get any more bizarre, the next chapter of history might prove you wrong. In the medieval world, work was not always honorable, not always clean, and sometimes not even safe for the soul. So far, we've explored strange and dangerous professions, but now we step into something far more unsettling. These were the jobs people whispered about, the roles few wanted, but society still depended on. Today, we enter the darkest corners of medieval labor. Chapter 18, The Night Soil Collector. When the sun set over medieval cities, a different workforce began its shift. Men who walked quietly through narrow streets, carrying buckets. These were the night soil collectors. What was night soil? Before modern plumbing, human waste had to be manually removed from homes and streets. Night soil collectors were responsible for emptying chamber pots, cleaning cesspits, transporting waste outside city walls, dumping it in designated areas, or using it as fertilizer. They worked at night for one simple reason: the smell and the shame. Why they worked in darkness? Cities preferred this work to be invisible. Night soil collectors often operated after midnight, in near silence, through back alleys, away from wealthy neighborhoods. It was essential work, but deeply stigmatized. The health risks. This job was extremely dangerous. Workers faced toxic fumes, infectious diseases, accidental suffocation in cesspits, skin infections. Many suffered lifelong health problems. The hidden backbone of cities. Despite the stigma, without them, medieval cities would have drowned in their own waste. They were invisible, but absolutely necessary. Chapter 19, The Leech Collector. Medicine in the medieval world was very different from today. One of the strangest medical professions was the leech collector. Why leeches were valuable? Medieval doctors believed in bloodletting, the idea that removing blood could cure illness. Leeches were perfect for this. They were used to treat fevers, headaches, inflammation, bad humors in the body. Demand for leeches was enormous. The dangerous collection process. Leech collectors often waded into swamps, marshes, muddy ponds, sometimes barefoot. They would allow leeches to attach to their own legs, then carefully remove and store them. Yes, their own bodies were the bait. The risks collectors faced: blood loss, infections, waterborne diseases, parasites, hypothermia in cold water. It was slow, uncomfortable work, and often poorly paid, a job that slowly disappeared. As medical science improved, bloodletting fell out of favor, and the leech collectors quietly faded into history. Chapter 20, The Court Jester. At first glance, the court jester seems almost cheerful. Colorful clothes, jokes, music, laughter in the royal hall. But the reality was far more complex. More than just a fool. Court jesters were professional entertainers who served kings and nobles. Their duties included performing comedy, singing and storytelling, mocking court figures, lightening tense political moments. But here's what made them unique. They were often the only people allowed to criticize the king openly, protected by their role. Because they spoke through humor, jesters could say things others could not. In the court of Edward IV, jesters were known to deliver uncomfortable truths disguised as jokes. It was a dangerous balance. Too mild, and they were useless. Too bold, and they risked punishment. The fine line. A successful jester needed sharp intelligence, perfect timing, emotional awareness, courage, because one wrong joke could end a career overnight. The loneliness behind the laughter. Many jesters lived in a strange social space, close to power, yet not fully respected, entertaining constantly, rarely taken seriously. Behind the bells and bright costumes was often a very careful survivor. Chapter 21, The Falconer. Not all strange medieval jobs were unpleasant. Some were prestigious, but highly specialized. One such role was the royal falconer, masters of hunting birds. Falconers trained birds of prey, especially falcons and hawks, for noble hunting expeditions. Their responsibilities included raising and feeding birds, training them to hunt, caring for injured falcons, accompanying nobles on hunts, maintaining expensive equipment. Falconry was a symbol of elite status, a noble adjacent profession. Because falcons were so valuable, falconers often worked closely with royalty. In some courts, including those influenced by Henry II, skilled falconers were highly respected. A well-trained falcon was worth a small fortune. The hidden difficulties. Despite its prestige, falconry was demanding. Falconers needed patience, deep animal knowledge, physical endurance, constant vigilance. Birds could escape, or refuse commands, or become aggressive. A quiet art. Unlike many medieval jobs, falconry required finesse rather than force. It was one of the few professions where patience truly ruled the day. Part 4 closing. As we've seen tonight, the medieval world depended on people doing work that ranged from noble to uncomfortable to deeply unsettling. From collectors who cleaned the darkness of cities, to entertainers who walked a dangerous line before kings, to hunters who mastered the skies. These forgotten workers shaped everyday medieval life far more than most chronicles ever admit. And yet, even now, we have not reached the most unbelievable medieval professions. Because in Part 5, we will uncover jobs so strange, so unexpected, that they almost sound fictional. But history records them clearly, and they are very real. By now, the medieval world may feel familiar. Dark streets, strange duties, lives shaped by necessity. But what if some of the most unusual jobs in history still sound almost unbelievable today? Not dangerous in obvious ways, not always dirty, but undeniably strange. Tonight, we explore professions that make modern work life feel very ordinary. And by the end, you may never look at medieval society the same way again. Let us continue. Chapter 22, The Knocker-Up. Long before alarm clocks existed, someone had to wake people for work. In growing medieval and early industrial towns, that job fell to a person known as the knocker-up, the human alarm clock. A knocker-up's job was simple, but essential. They would walk through streets before dawn, tap on clients' windows, use long sticks or poles, sometimes throw small pebbles, wait until the sleeper responded. Only then would they move on, working before sunrise. Most knocker-ups began their rounds in deep darkness, often around 3 a.m. 4 a.m. They worked quietly through sleeping neighborhoods, careful not to wake the wrong household. A job built on trust. Clients paid small weekly fees, but reliability was everything. If a knocker-up failed, workers could lose their jobs. Factories depended on punctual labor. The quiet disappearance. As mechanical alarm clocks became affordable in the 19th century, the knocker-up slowly vanished. A job replaced not by policy, but by technology. Chapter 23, The Medieval Barber Surgeon. Today, we separate barbers and surgeons very clearly. In the medieval world, they were often the same person. More than haircuts, the barber surgeon performed hair trimming, beard shaving, bloodletting, tooth extractions, minor surgeries, wound treatment. Yes, you could get a haircut and a medical procedure in the same visit. Why the roles were combined? University-trained physicians focused on theory, but hands-on procedures were considered lower status. So practical medical tasks fell to barber surgeons. They became the working-class doctors of medieval towns. The risks to patients. Medical knowledge was limited, and sterilization did not exist. Procedures could be painful, dangerous, infection-prone. Yet for many people, the barber surgeon was the only available medical help. The origin of the barber pole. The familiar red and white barber pole comes from this era. It symbolized red equals blood, white equals bandages, a quiet reminder of the barber's surgical past. Chapter 24, The Medieval Messenger. In a world without phones, without email, without even reliable roads, communication depended on human endurance. Enter the medieval messenger, carrying news across kingdoms. Messengers delivered royal orders, military updates, diplomatic letters, urgent warnings, trade communications. Speed could change the course of wars. A dangerous profession. Messengers faced serious risks. Bandits, harsh weather, wild animals, political enemies, exhaustion. Some carried sensitive information during conflicts like the 100 Years' War, where interception could be deadly. The physical demands. Messengers often traveled on horseback, on foot, day and night, across rough terrain. Endurance was their greatest skill. Unsung heroes of history. Many major historical events depended on messages arriving on time. Yet most messengers remained completely anonymous, lost to the roads they once traveled. Chapter 25, The Medieval Gong Farmer. Few jobs in history sound as unpleasant as this one. The gong farmer. Despite the name, this had nothing to do with farming crops. What did gong farmers do? Gong farmers cleaned out large privies and cesspits, especially in bigger towns. Their duties included entering deep waste pits, shoveling accumulated sewage, loading it into carts, transporting it outside city limits. They typically worked at night. For obvious reasons. Extremely dangerous work. Gong farmers faced serious hazards. Toxic methane gas, risk of suffocation, collapse of pit walls, severe infections, overwhelming fumes. Some workers reportedly died inside cesspits. Surprisingly well paid. Because few people wanted the job, gong farmers sometimes earned relatively good wages. But the social stigma was heavy. Most lived on the edges of society. The necessary workers, like night soil collectors, gong farmers performed work that kept medieval cities functioning. Work few wanted to see, but everyone depended on. As we step back from the medieval world, a quiet realization begins to form. History was not built only by kings, or knights, or famous names in textbooks. It was built by ordinary people doing extraordinary, and sometimes very strange, jobs. People who woke cities before sunrise, practiced medicine with razors, carried messages across dangerous lands, cleaned the unseen depths of growing towns. Their work was difficult, often uncomfortable, sometimes dangerous, and almost always forgotten. But without them, the medieval world simply could not function. Thank you for joining this long journey into the strange professions of the past. If you found these forgotten jobs fascinating, there are many more hidden stories waiting in history's quieter corners. Until next time, remember, the past was often stranger than we imagine. Bye, we will meet again.